We're living in a digital world, and banks are facing challenges from all directions. Their customers are making digital demands. There is growing competition from fintechs. There's the threat of cybercrime, as well as the need to adopt new technologies such as blockchain. To survive, banks must embrace innovation, and that's something they haven't always done well in the past. In this Viewpoint series, we look at the future of banking in a digital world. We speak to bankers and industry experts about what banks must do to both lead and compete. So we're living in a digital world, and banks need to evolve in order to survive. I mean, how do you see that evolution taking place in 2017?
Brian, I think 2017 is going to be the year of opening up the banking system at large. And, you know, I spent a lot of time across the world talking to banks in various markets, and I would say this is a common theme. And it manifests itself in different ways. So from a technology standpoint, it manifests itself in terms of moving to open architectures, APIs and microservices to expose customer data to external parties. It manifests itself in terms of regulatory challenges, the impact of PSD2 in Europe, regulators' attempts to improve and increase the portability of accounts. This is what banks are facing. Now, you know, I think that this is on top of, as opposed to instead of, what they were needing to deal with in previous years, in 2016 and before. You know, what we saw then was almost a scenario of banks being subjected to, you know, death by a thousand cuts. They had the advent of new players, fintechs, etc., starting to nibble away at high margin areas. Again, they had regulatory pressures to deal with, and of course they had the overall economic environment, low interest rate regime and so forth, so it's just much tougher to make money in this business. So, but this is the scenario that they face. So as I say, I think it's more the same, plus this move to an open banking system.
Okay, now in order to lead and compete in the industry, I mean, banks are going to have to be nimble and innovative, aren't they? So how can they actually achieve that, not just to keep up, but actually to take a lead and take a march on the industry? Yeah.
Well, I think the leading banks are actually making great strides already. So, you know, many banks have invested to create, in effect, internal R&D capabilities. They've set up innovation labs in places like San Francisco and Israel to access the latest technology, the latest thinking, and importantly, to build relationships with fintechs. And that, in turn, is helping them to think in new and, if you like, agile and nimble ways.
So this is quite a cultural change for banks, isn't it? Because they're used to doing things in much more of a process-oriented way rather than looking at sort of innovation and new ideas and taking this on board.
I think that's exactly right. And I think this, again, is the next frontier. So not very many banks at this stage have succeeded in embedding this new wave of innovation into their mainstream businesses. You know, it has tended to be isolated or somewhat isolated sets of activities, and now they are faced with the challenge of how do they adopt this and how do they influence their business models to become more agile and nimble and so forth.
Okay, but it's not the only pressure they're facing, is it? Because they're also facing huge cost pressures.
Yeah.
So how can they actually achieve this innovation at the same time as controlling costs?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I think most banks have what amounts to a structural cost problem still, and unfortunately, you know, every bank I can think of has been through wave after wave of cost cutting and re-engineering and so forth. So if you like, the easy gains have already been exploited. So you know, I think they're going to have to invest in order to move to the next level of cost. And you know, again, I think that what we see in terms of the advent of digital technology is now starting to be applied right across their business model. So where they initially focused, which was around digitizing the customer experience and introducing you know, new channels and new ways for customers to access their institutions, I think some of those principles need to apply across their, if you like, middle and back office. And we are seeing this. So we are seeing banks you know, go further with automation. We're seeing many banks introduce new technologies, robotics, machine learning, AI, etc., to drive cost out of their processes and frankly, to streamline and in many cases to reimagine what banking is and how to actually execute banking transactions.
Right, so we're definitely seeing massive change in banking, aren't
Huge.
we, as you describe it?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is you know, as interesting a period of change in banking as certainly I've experienced in the last 30 years. And it's, yeah, I mean, you know, every year the amount of change increases. It is quite phenomenal at the moment.
Rob, thanks very much.
Thank you.